Hello and welcome or welcome back. My name is Justyna. Welcome. First house is the house of the self. This is the house that describes our persona, our personality, our identity as well. Now, the planets in the first house also influence our physical appearance as well in a big way. Now, if you don't have any planets in the first house and you look at the ruler of the sign that is present on the first house cusp, and if this is Aries, then you look at the interpretation of Mars. If Taurus is your rising sign, then here you look at the interpretation of Venus. With Gemini, it's Mercury. With Cancer, it's the moon. Then you've got Leo, that's the sun. With Virgo, it's Mercury. With Libra, it's Venus. With Scorpio, it's a little bit more tricky because Scorpio has got two rulers. There is its traditional ruler, which is Mars, and the modern ruler, which is Pluto. Now, here, Sagittarius, that's Jupiter, and then Capricorn, Saturn. And then we've got Aquarius here again, two rulers. Traditional is Saturn, and the modern is Uranus. And finally, Pisces, yet again, two rulers, Jupiter, the traditional, and then Neptune is the modern ruler. So see whether you can also identify with the symbolism of the ruler of your ascendant, also called the rising sign. Let me just quickly share my screen with you so where this is the house of the self, your ego, how you present yourself to the world, your physical appearance, your look, your identity. So we're looking at this house today. Okay, so now let's maybe have a look at each planetary influence in this house so that you can gain a better understanding of what each planet means. Now, here we start from the sun. Yes. So first of all, what does the sun represent? The sun represents our identity, our ego, who we are at the core. Something really important because obviously we've got different house systems. I usually use whole signs these days, but it's also interesting to keep that Placidus house system in place, which actually most people, that's where they start with the Placidus. So have a look where your sun is, because will have a really important significance here. If your sun is at a degree that is before the ascendant sign, then your sun will have a flavor of that 12th house influence, because if you use Placidus house system, then your sun would have been in your 12th house. However, if the sun is later than the ascendant degree, then that's the first house influence. So that's on a side note. It will be with every single planet. So I'll mention that in the other planets in this video, because maybe you're just going to watch it for one particular planet for yourself. Okay, so yes, so basically with the sun in the first house, and here, this is a general interpretation of the sun in the first house. You need to look, first of all, at that degree, because if your sun is actually before the degree of the ascendant, you get that flavor of the 12th house, of that behind the scene, hidden identity that needs time to develop. And it's a slightly different dynamics, but overall, and also the aspects that the sun makes, or the planets with those squares and oppositions, that will be more challenging, or perhaps some challenges along in your journey towards self-discovery. Okay, so first of all, the sun in the first house, very often we have this need to shine. We have this need to, even when it comes to your physical appearance, you might enjoy wearing bright colors, shiny colors, colors that stand out. Very often when I see people wearing really bright colors, I think, oh, I wonder if they have sun in the first house, angular house, or even the 10th house, when they want to stand out, when they want to be visible. And at the same time here, or Leo on the ascendant, also quite interesting here. All right, so basically, yes, there is this desire perhaps to be recognized, to be seen in the first house, to shine. And very often with the sun in the first house, we don't have these, we have this need to perhaps get ourselves out there, to make a mark in the world as well. But here, Something to watch out for as well is that a tendency perhaps towards self-centeredness, or perhaps overemphasis on personal identity. So here it's essential to watch out for this kind of tendency with the sun in the first house. But at the same time, there is a strong need for self-expression, having this strong influence upon other people as well. Sun in the first house can bring a lot of confidence to the person with displacement, lots of natural charisma, and that magnetic energy that draws others towards you. Now, the moon in the first house. So the moon represents our emotions, our feelings. Very often with the moon in the first house, it's difficult to hide your emotions, your feelings, because it's all written on your face. The moon represents the feelings and emotions. So if you are in a bad mood or in a good mood, or even when someone says something and maybe you don't fully agree with what they said, or perhaps if it kind of irritated you, it's also going to show up on your face very easily. So it's kind of difficult to hide these emotions, these expressions, emotional expressions. Here with the sun and the moon in the first house, there's a really deep sense of empathy, understanding towards others. It's also essential to remember about healthy boundaries with other people, because it's very easy to absorb other people's emotions. So here with the moon in the first house, you might have a very strong emotional presence, and at the same time, you might absorb other people's emotions and feelings with ease as well. The moon in the first house, due to your ability to perhaps understand other people's emotions and feelings, and generally you probably have a very strong emotional presence. There's a tendency here also to absorb other people's feelings and emotions, and for this reason it's essential to know when to set clear boundaries. At the same time, with all these perhaps ability to perhaps absorb other people's emotions and feelings like a sponge, it's also essential to find time for rest and some emotional peace, or perhaps a warm bath, spending time in nature. You need to kind of cleanse yourself or clear yourself from any emotions you would have accumulated throughout the day. Now, have a look where your moon is present, if it's at an earlier degree than your ascendant degree, or at a later degree, because this will be really significant here. If you use whole sign house system, then your moon will be in the first house, regardless of whether it's at an early or a late degree. But in Placidus, if your moon, if your natal moon is at an earlier degree than your ascendant degree, then it would likely be in your 12th house, which means that these dynamics here, emotional dynamics, are very different. And here that emotional sensitivity is even deeper and greater. And there is that greater need even for emotional withdrawal and that need to recharge oneself. So it's something on a side note, but I thought it's quite interesting to know as well. So here, yes, there is a tendency towards moodiness and emotional reactivity with displacement. Also, that ability to connect deeply with other people. Perhaps you might also have this tendency to attract people with high and strong emotions, or perhaps people who have a need to share their emotional baggage or some problems with you as well. And for this reason, it's really, really important to cleanse yourself of these externally absorbed emotional energies. So here with the moon in the first house, it's really important to find a healthy balance between that emotional sensitivity with a sense of stability and security. All right, so let's have a look at Mercury now. So Mercury is the planet of communication, rational thinking, our mind. So of course, the first thing that comes into our mind is that a person with Mercury in the first house is a very good communicator, have this really strong need to express their ideas and thoughts in a written way, in a verbal way. Now, this will depend on the strength of your natal Mercury in your birth chart, whether it is in the mute sign whether it is in an earlier or a later degree of your ascendant, whether it makes any challenging or more harmonious aspects to other planets. Of course, challenges with communication and self-expression will come if Mercury connects by a square to Saturn, or if it's in a mute sign. So in one of the water signs, sometimes it's easier to write, to express oneself in a written way than verbally. Now, at the same time, if Mercury is at an earlier degree than your ascendant, then there is that 12th house influence very often, so that tendency to stay in your head, or there's also a tendency to towards overthinking, over analyzing. So generally, people with the Mercury in the first house, yes, they have a strong need for self-expression. They are very curious. There is that Gemini quality that comes into play here with that Mercurian energy, Gemini and Virgo flavor. So lots of like, well, an analytical mind, but lots of, I think lots of questions, especially here, children with Mercury in the first house. They're very curious. They want to know why. And so I think it's really good to get a book which answers lots of questions. Why? A why book. And I think it's amazing because people with Mercury in the first house, they absorb knowledge very easily. They are very clever and witty and intelligent. There is that very young energy connected to this placement because Mercury is connected to youth. Yes, very often actually Mercury in the first house, people with displacement, they wear glasses as well, I've noticed, or Gemini on their ascendant. So yes, a curious, a probing, analytical mind, very with a need to learn, with a need to share, and very intelligent, very clever, very knowledgeable, very versatile as well. But here, watch out for these tendencies towards over-analyzing, overthinking, because the mind is never really rested. It's rather restless. So it's for this reason, people with displacement, they need to engage in activities that will help them to perhaps use their stimulated or overstimulated mind. So perhaps board games, reading, writing, communicating, working on projects of a intellectually stimulating nature. With Venus in the first house, on the other hand, Venus in the first house, of course, is connected to sensual energy. I think with Venus in the first house, this is a placement that can generally really positively influence the physical features. It usually produces either a beautiful voice, especially if it's in Gemini. It can produce that need for harmony, for balance, for harmonious relationships, especially here if Venus is not actually connecting with Pluto by a square, for example. But otherwise, Venus on its own in the first house can create that need for harmony, for balance, for balanced, well-balanced and healthy relationships, but also can produce some beautiful features like beautiful lips, for example, or beautiful refined cheeks. So there is some kind of beautiful influence here with Venus in the first house that will have a positive effect upon the physical appearance. Now, with Venus in the first house, it's generally one needs to watch out, because very often here with Venus in the first house, we need approval of others to feel good within ourselves. So I think it's really essential to learn to develop that sense of self-worth and self-esteem within, without relying on approval of external sources, people, situations, without seeking that validation. People with this placement need to watch out for this tendency towards being overly nice. So I think it's also connected to that validation. You need to know your worth, and you need to know when to say no. So I think that assertiveness, it's essential to develop that sense of assertiveness, self-confidence, know when to say no. With Venus in the first house, one can have really strong appreciation towards art, creativity, art, beauty. They might actually want to create beauty around them as well, have this need for creating beauty in their physical surroundings. All right, so now Mars, the warrior, and with Mars in the first house, Mars is the planet connected to assertion, motivation, drive, courage. Mars can have a very strong influence upon a person's appearance as well. It can produce a reddish complexion. It can also produce where very often there is some kind of the hair. The hair is either reddish or the hair could be blonde, or even if the hair is dark, at some point in your life, you might feel like dyeing your hair. You might be attracted to red, orange, yellow colors in your wardrobe, for example, in your personal style. Right, so Mars, yes, Mars goes head first. And if Mars in the first house, there is this tendency towards risk taking. Mars in the first house gives one a really strong physical presence, high level of energy, high level of drive, of motivation. People with displacement are usually of a very competitive nature. Now, of course, it will depend on what else is going on in your chart. You might have Saturn conjunct your ascendant and Mars in the first house. So of course, Saturn will slow things down and perhaps will make you work on that assertion, on that self-confidence, for example, as well. But overall, with Mars in the first house, watch out because you might have a tendency towards head injuries, even like head bumps. Doesn't have to be anything major, but very often this is the case with that strong Mars influence in a person's chart. With Mars in the first house, there's a tendency towards risk-taking, perhaps without considering the consequences first. I think the goal of this placement, or one of the goals, is to work on developing a healthy self-control and perhaps conflict resolution, because there's a tendency towards being impulsive, dynamic as well. And Mars is connected to impatient energy. You want things to be done and quickly, perhaps you want, but at the same time, you enjoy starting new things. Mars has got this inner drive to get on with things without waiting for something to happen. So there is a lot of self-drive and motivation connected to this placement. And with Mars in the first house, very often people with displacement, they get really enthusiastic with starting new goals, something fresh and new. And there's also a tendency towards perhaps argumentative or confrontational behavioral patterns. So it's also something to work on, and on perhaps finding that healthy balance between the desire for action and achievement with a sense of caution and consideration. Okay, so here, yes, so lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm, lots of drive. Very often with Mars in the first house, one really enjoys physical activity, sports. They need something going on in their life to release all that energy that they have. So yes, physical activities, physical sport, these are really, really strongly emphasized, and they might enjoy working independently rather than perhaps in groups. All right, so let's look at Jupiter now. Jupiter and the planet of expansion, growth, and lots of positivity as well. But when Jupiter is also forms squares to other planets in our birth chart, this can lead to tendency towards overindulgence, risk-taking, and perhaps being overly optimistic as well. So it's something, just moderation. It's all about practicing moderation. But whenever I see someone with Jupiter in their first house, I see that this person has a big smile on their face. These are very smiley people because they've got this optimism. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. So even if things are not going well in their life, they still see a way out in some way. While a person with Saturn in the first house might be more cautious, more realistic, maybe even more pessimistic at times. A person with Jupiter in the first house, they just they have a more positive outlook on life. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. Basically, it's all about this big vision, grand vision. Very often with Jupiter in the first house, just the basic things don't satisfy you because you have this bigger vision, perhaps, of what you want to achieve, a bigger goal always at the back of your mind. So overall here, yes, Jupiter gives a lot of optimism, a lot of faith and hope towards here people with displacement. But at the same time, very often an element of something foreign is connected to displacement, perhaps a lot of traveling throughout your life, foreign languages, foreign people, foreign income. There is something foreign attached to this placement. So overall, natural charisma, natural and positive outlook on life is very much here connected to displacement. But at the same time, there is this strong desire for growth, for expansion, for moving forward with your life. Right. So at the same time, people with Jupiter in the first house, they are lucky in their life. And I met so many people in my life with Jupiter in the first house, and I think that this is basically good karma from previous lives because they seem to be just luck comes their way and out of the blue. So they attract positive opportunities very often, talent, abundance. Of course, it's not all unicorns and rainbows all their life, but overall there is that positivity and growth here throughout their life. The negative manifestation of Jupiter is, of course, overindulgence, inability to know when to stop. When it comes to risk taking, when it comes to indulgence or overindulgence, when it comes to having fun. Perhaps sometimes people with displacement might be taking on too much, or perhaps they might be overestimating their abilities. So it's really important for people with displacement to find a healthy balance between their desire for growth and expansion and that perhaps ability to know when to stop, to know when to let go. It could be also a tendency for some people with displacement to overspend or overcommit to a certain objective, a certain goal. So here again, moderation is really important with displacement. All right, so let's have a look at Saturn. Saturn and the Lord of Karma. Saturn is also the planet connected to responsibility, structure, discipline, order. Saturn in the first house. Well, often with Saturn in the first house, it takes time to fully perhaps develop a sense of self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth. Sometimes with Saturn in the first house, that sense of confidence wasn't fully developed or perhaps was damaged, crushed in some way early in life as a result of some situations at home with family members or at school with friends. So there is some kind of certain degree of wound or lack of self-esteem, lack of self-worth. First Saturn return is really important for those with Saturn in the first house because this is when you can really and truly come out of your shell. This is when you might go down with your emotions and you will go through this major phase of self-discovery, but you will come out so much stronger. Until then, it's a journey towards self-discovery, but that true self-discovery occurs when during the first Saturn return. So here, very often also displacement, Saturn in the first house produces increased responsibilities early in life, perhaps as a result of perhaps some difficulties at home with finances, with the economic situation, or perhaps this could be also about that one of the parents, the father was lacking and the child had to take on the father's responsibilities to a certain extent. This is often the case. That it's not always the case, but it could be the case here. Saturn increases your responsibility. The first house is connected to our young age. And here with Saturn, very often these responsibilities might increase. And at the same time, there's a tendency towards pessimism, self-criticism as well, self-doubt, because that wasn't encouraged or built in any way or in some substantial way for the person to feel fully confident as young adults. So it's something that you will have to work on throughout your life. As I said, the first 30 years, it's a major learning experience. And then you get this full understanding of the self, or at least substantial, during your Saturn return, when all these memories might actually come up to the surface, but you'll be reviewing, reassessing, and really gaining a better understanding of yourself in many ways. People with displacement, they are very good actually with self-control, self-discipline as well. Now, Saturn in the first house can also make one being really pulled to the ground, literally. So with Saturn in the first house, it might be difficult to sit or work straight. There's a tendency to be pulled to the ground. I learned it from traditional astrology, and I found it really fascinating. So you need to work on your strength in the upper part of the body. So here with displacement, it's really important to develop that self-esteem, self-worth as well, self-confidence. But at the same time, with displacement, one can really, really achieve so much in their lives because of that ability connected to self-discipline, self-control. But very often, these major achievements with displacement come after that first Saturn return. All right, so yeah, that's it. Saturn in the first house, a strong sense of responsibility, a strong desire for structure in life. These are very hardworking people who can really dedicate their energy, their time towards a specific goal or objective. Now, the Saturn in the first house can also make one have gray hair earlier than usual. Saturn is connected to gray color. So very often people with the Saturn in the first house, they have gray hair much earlier than other people, for example. This could be also one of the themes here. Okay, so Uranus in the first house, connected to that erratic energy. So perhaps those with Uranus in the first house, they might actually have this tendency, when you touch something, you get like this electric effect. So this is one thing. Another thing, there is a need to be different, to have your own unique, or to develop your own unique physical appearance or identity. You want to be different. I think Uranus in the first house brings a lot of change in life, at least in the initial phase of life. Uranus in the first house. I think lots of changes, lots of unpredictability in one's life, but also a strong need for independence, a strong need to express oneself in a unique way, different to the usual. There's a tendency also to live on your own terms, work during your own flexible hours as well, as a freelancer, self-employed, for example. So there is this sense of unpredictability to this placement, to your identity, to your persona as well. You might seem as someone unpredictable to others because you like to do things differently, your own way. And I think people with displacement, they need to live their life slightly different. So any monotony or any rigid routine might not actually appeal to you. So there is that eccentricity, originality to your physical appearance, to your style, for instance, to the hair color, your hair color. Something to work on with this placement is to establish a sense of stability, a sense of routine, because you might struggle with that with Uranus in the first house. People with this placement have a tendency often to take on too much, or perhaps neglect their responsibilities. So here, I think that's the goal, one of the goals here of this placement. But at the same time here, yes, there is the need for freedom, innovation. I think people with this placement can think out of the box. They've got very unique, original ideas. I think they are really great asset when it comes to any teamwork, for example. There's a lot of uniqueness, originality, and they can really impress you. But at the same time, they can be very unpredictable and very surprising with their ideas, with their actions as well. They might be attracted to the unusual, to generally there's something unique and different about people with Uranus in the first house. There's that rebellious side to their nature as well. All right, so now Neptune in the first house. The first thing that comes to my mind is the boundaries. People with Neptune in the first house can be very psychic, very intuitive, very spiritual. They might be involved in jobs connected to spirituality, astrology, tarot, Reiki. But at the same time, I think that one of the lessons of this placement is to set clear and healthy boundaries with others. It's a lesson that maybe comes in a later stage of life. With Neptune, there's no boundaries very often, and no structure even as well. Of course, it will depend on other placements that you have in your chart, but overall with Neptune, it's really important to know who you should or you can let into your life, because you absorb other people's energies very easily. So at the same time, you have this need to withdraw, recharge yourself. It's very healthy for you to overall to protect your boundaries, to protect your energy field so that you don't get drained or overwhelmed by the external influences, because you are likely to be quite externally influenced, at least in the initial phase of your life. Now, watch out for any addictions as well. There is also a tendency towards falling into some negative habits or routines that could negatively impact your health and well-being. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of that psychic energy, intuition, and that I think spirituality is really important here in your life. If it isn't already, then it will be at some point. There's a strong sense of empathy, compassion with this placement. Very artistic souls here, artistic, spiritual, creative as well. Music and poetry or writing, reading. These are really important elements of your nature, of your life, of your psyche, as well as perhaps painting, drawing. So there is this lot of creativity here with Neptune in the first house. At the same time, it's really essential to make sure that you set healthy boundaries, because you have a tendency to absorb other people's emotions, feelings, problems, and it could really affect you in a negative way. So for this reason, spending time in nature or alone, meditating, or just taking a break or a rest will be very, very beneficial for your nature, for your personality, for your overall well-being. Now, Pluto in the first house, it's a very transformative and intense energy here, very magnetic as well, because you will attract people towards you due to your magnetic nature, but not just anyone. It needs to be someone who is comfortable with that intensity in your aura. So yes, Pluto in the first house brings a lot of transformation in life overall, from early in life, lots of transformative life experiences. I think there is this need for depth. There is this need for perhaps learning a lot about oneself on a much, much deeper level. So here, people with displacement are very often interested in spirituality, astrology, but also in psychology, psychotherapy, because there is this need to dive deep into their psyche to gain a full and deep understanding of oneself. Lots of transformative and life-changing events every 9 years, pretty much. Life isn't just like a stable routine. No, life transforms significantly every so often, pretty much every 9 years, with the eclipses reoccurring in the same area of life every 9 years. You go through this big shift of energy. So overall here with Pluto in the first house, because of your high influence upon other people. It's also important to use your energies wisely because you will have a very transformative effect on other people. You can transform other people's lives, but at the same time, you need to use your energies wisely. Now, with Pluto in the first house, there could be also this strong desire for power and the need for a deep transformation as well. Regeneration. There is this talent for influencing other people. One needs to watch out because there is a tendency towards intense, obsessive, compulsive behavioral patterns. So for this reason, it's really important to work on that, on developing that healthy sense of self-control, self-awareness, because it's very easy for people with Pluto in the first house to let their desires or emotions control their actions. All right, so thank you very much. This is what I've got for you today about the first house, the planets in the first house. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.